Thanks, welcome. As Wilson mentioned, my lab is premier, and also we have a friend of mine called good colleague Prince Parker, MPP Hondong, and also to my right is MPP Su Wong. The last week of October, Ontario conducted or carried out a mission, a trade mission to China. That's the first one for our premier, Kathleen Wynne, and for me it's the fourth time. I think this one is really a huge success. We have visited many number of cities. We signed many contracts. We were able to draw lots of investments, create many jobs. And during our 1 week in China, we have met the government officials. We did a lot of corporate call and corporate visits, and able to showcase Ontario to the Chinese, and at the same time able to kind of do some people-to-people engagement. And so, as I said, it's really a huge success. And I have one person here to tell you more about that success. It's our premier, Kathleen Wynne, right here. So why don't you start?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael. Well, first of all, thank you very much for taking the time to come today and have this conversation with us. As Michael said, we're very happy about the trip that we took. We're very pleased at the successes that we were able to achieve in China. I'm very pleased at the connections that we were able to make between Canadian companies, Ontario companies, and Chinese companies. It really seems to me that there are huge opportunities, quite frankly, for both countries. And I'll just start there, that the only reason to go on a trade mission, I think, is to build a relationship that's mutually beneficial. If somehow you have the idea, if we had the idea that going to China was just about Ontario and there wasn't going to be an expectation of anything in return, I think that would be a huge mistake. There has to be a mutual benefit, and so we were warmly welcomed everywhere that we went. As you know, we flew into Shanghai and then took the high-speed train to Nanjing, and then took the high-speed train back from Nanjing to Shanghai and then to Beijing. And it was, from the moment we landed, it was a wonderful experience, being able to experience that infrastructure, that rail that I hadn't experienced before, and it made me, as I said to Michael, it made me even more determined to come back and to work to build high-speed rail and to build infrastructure here in Ontario. But I was, on a personal level, I was really excited to be able to connect with some of the individual people. So, for example, I had an opportunity to walk in the Nanjing University quadrangle and meet with some of the people who teach at Nanjing University, hear a little bit of the history, but also some of the community people, many of the grandmothers and grandfathers who were there with their grandchildren. That's where they go during the day. And what that let me see was a window on how the children are taken care of in China. And you know, there's a real culture of the grandparents looking after the children while the parents go to work. You all know that, but I was able to experience it firsthand in Nanjing. I did have a chance to go to the Forbidden City in Beijing, and then on my last day I got to walk a little piece of the Great Wall, and those were terrific experiences. I have to say, for a person who was born in 1953 in Ontario and grew up I grew up in Richmond Hill, so very close to here, but it was a small town then. I could never in my wildest dreams have imagined that I would be able to go to China in my life. It just wasn't part of my frame of reference. My grandmother raised money for Norman Bethune, and she was part of the United Church of Canada, and she raised money with the United Church Women to send over to Norman Bethune. So as a little girl, I grew up hearing stories about this wonderful man in China, and that we were supporting him. But it seemed a very far, very long way away. Obviously, as I've gotten older, the world has gotten smaller, and so there was more of a possibility. But I did a few times when I was there think, wow, I couldn't have imagined that I would be able to do this. So it was a huge honor. I also had the opportunity, and Han has talked to me many times about how beautiful Shanghai is. He came here when he was 13, so he has lived in Shanghai. But even since Han has lived there, it has changed enormously. And so walking on the Bund and looking across the river and seeing how much it has grown up. And one of the interesting things that I learned as I was walking along there were thousands of tourists, people who had come to see Shanghai, and I was told that most of those people were people from the country who had come into Shanghai. They weren't people who were working in Shanghai necessarily, and so they were experiencing the Bund as tourists, just as I was, with new eyes. So looking across that river and seeing how sophisticated the city is on both sides of the river now was quite amazing. But the thing that was personally, the thing that was the most impressive to me was the scale. And I said this to the Ontario reporters when we were getting ready to come back. You know, the size, the fact of 1.3 billion people being in cities where there were 24 million people, 22 million people, and having the conversations with the political leaders about clean tech and the need for investment in clean tech to deal with the clean air, the clean water issues that China is contending with right now. That was probably the most impressive thing, and that led to my conviction that there is more that we can do together between China and Ontario, because we have the expertise in development of clean tech. We have innovators here who are developing new technologies that we know that people in China are looking for. We also have the other issue that came up over and over again was agriculture, agri-food, the need for more food. I know that there may be a question about Alibaba and the conversation that we had with Alibaba. It was very interesting to me that when I came into that meeting, Michael was there before, but when I came into the meeting, what they wanted to talk about was agriculture and our ability to develop a relationship that would allow for more exports and people to be able to access agricultural products online. The final issue that I will raise, and then I want to hear your questions, but Sue and I have talked so many times about healthcare and the expertise that we have here in Ontario. One of the things that some officials talked to me about was the reality of their investment in healthcare and the need that they are feeling right now to increase their investment in healthcare. We had Baycrest Center with us, so the whole issue around supporting people in their retirement, supporting seniors, care for seniors, and housing, those were all issues that were raised with us. And I think that there are more opportunities for us to share expertise and knowledge on home care, health care, because those are areas that are really developing as the community expands and as their processes change. Because as the population ages, we're all dealing with an aging population. China is as well. They're looking for new ways to support seniors and to make sure that they have healthy lifetimes throughout their lifetime. And it's not always possible, as I learned from some of the officials, it's not always possible for the younger generation to look after the older generation in the way it has been in the past. So we're grappling with some of the same issues. So those are the things that that impressed me. You know, we signed 26 agreements, 11 very significant investment projects, and we're very happy about those. But from my perspective, what the trade mission did was set us up for further relationship building and further opportunities for mutual benefit.
My name is Cindy Woman for Fairchild TV. My question is for the Premier. Since you talk about that the representative from Alibaba had a meeting with you and the Minister Chen, could you talk about in depth of the agreement or maybe the meeting, the detail about the meeting, or do we have export?
Yeah, we don't have. I'll let Michael fill in the blanks here, but Minister Duguid was also in that meeting. It was more of an exploratory conversation, Cindy. It was more of an initial discussion, and I think as a result of that meeting and a couple of other meetings, I said to folks, we have to make sure that our Minister of Agriculture goes to China and that we take some of our producers and our food processors to China to further this conversation. So it was exploratory, but I know that they are looking for product, and that's the opportunity for us.
Yeah, well, basically it's an introductory meeting, and Alibaba kind enough to send in their technical people who I was told one travel over 100 kilometers coming to Beijing to meet us. So I was a bit late into the meeting as well. My conversation with them basically is all centered in agriculture. Okay, as you know, in Ontario we have high quality food. We have the cleanest water, the cleanest air, and you know that is exactly the challenge that China is facing. So I think they're very much interested in perhaps even retailing our agricultural product, and so they keep asking on the agriculture side. So I think this is a great potential that we can cultivate as. You know, yesterday about this internet sale, 38 minutes, 10 billion Canadian dollar being sold through the internet. I hope that's 10 billion all Canadian agricultural product.
I think there was a lot of interest, Cindy, in the volumes that we could provide, and what could the technology be that would allow us to increase our export market. That was my takeaway from the meeting.
Okay, my name is Joseph Lau from TorontoTV. So everything in me is import from China, except the dollar in my pocket. That's Canadian dollar.
Everything,
including myself, is from China. Okay.
Everything you're wearing.
I'm wearing, yeah, and okay. So and also the import keeps the grocery pricing down. So that's good for the people in Ontario. Then we know that the trade deficit, the trade between Canada and China is trade deficit. So that means more import than export. Right. And also according to the news, say, in 2020, the trade volume will go up to 100 billion. All right? If the trade deficit, more trade volumes, it means more trade deficit. So how to reverse this trend? Thank you.
Well, let me just make a sort of general comment, and that is the scale. So, we are 13.5 million people, and we're talking about a relationship with a country of 1.3 billion. So there is an inherent imbalance in that. So what we want to try to do is to close that gap a bit, which is, I think, what you're asking. And quite frankly, from my perspective, what that means is pushing our companies to understand better how to export, what the export opportunities are. I think that is exactly the conversation that we were having with Alibaba. It's the conversation that I am having with our agri-food sector right now, because we will not be able to compete globally, quite frankly, let alone with China, if we don't have more of an export mentality. And that is exactly what I am trying to instill in our businesses. And what I found was that the connections that companies were making while we were over there, the agreements that were signed were things that had been in the works, and we were able to finalize some of them more quickly because we were there. But there were new agreements that started to be talked about because people were getting to know each other. And that's what's important about a trade mission like this. But it is all about us increasing our export potential and being able to demonstrate that we have some of the things that Chinese companies and the Chinese government and population needs.
Hi, my name is Ting from CNTV Canada, and I know this is a trade mission, but the human rights topic always haunted Canadian leaders when they visit China, especially when there's a Hong Kong protest, and Ontario has just canceled the deal with the Chinese government-funded Confucius Institute. So I just wondering, how did you balance the topic of human rights and this trade mission?
Right. Thank you for asking that. First of all, on the issue of the Confucius Institute, that was actually not the Ontario government that canceled that. The Toronto District School Board was in an arrangement, and we don't know the details of that, and they made a decision. As you know, local school boards make those decisions on their own. But on that, let me say that it's very important to me, and I said this to some of the students at Nanjing University who are on an exchange, because there were Chinese students who had been to Canada and Canadian students who were studying at Nanjing. And I said very clearly that I accepted their advice that we need to provide children, students, young people here in Ontario more opportunities to learn more languages, including Mandarin. That they need opportunities to learn to speak the Chinese language, and that was the #1 recommendation that students gave to me. So, and you know, my background is in linguistics, and I understand how important it is that we provide opportunities for kids to be multilingual, not just bilingual. On the issue of human rights, I did have a conversation, a private meeting with the Party Secretary Luo Jing, right, and in Jiangsu, and the issue of freedom of speech and the ability, whether in China or in Ontario, the ability of people to gather peacefully and express themselves did come up, and I reinforced what I have said here, and I said it to the Party Secretary that I supported people's right to gather, to express themselves freely, and to gather peacefully. And that has always been my position, and it will continue to be.
Hi, I'm from North Star Times. On the final day of the mission, you signed a big agreement with Chinese telecom giant Huawei.
Yes.
It is known that Huawei has encountered skepticism from the federal government because it works in a sensitive industry. And Huawei is working hard to demonstrate they are building a Canadian company. What's your view about Huawei and its role in Ontario? Thank you.
So my view of the company, and certainly from our tour of it, is that it's an incredibly advanced and innovative organization. And that there's huge potential in the work that they are doing to improve people's lives. I mean, for example, we saw a piece of technology that would allow for cell phone coverage, for example, because there are places where it's very difficult to get the towers in place, and this technology is just a small piece of like a component that would go on a telephone pole or could be used in urban centers and would improve people's connectivity. That's just one tiny example. I mean, they're doing hundreds of things that will improve people's lives, and particularly in some of our very urban centers. So I think that there is huge opportunity there. Obviously, it's very important to us that all the protections, all the privacy protections, and all of the rules and regulations that we have in place in Ontario, that those are adhered to, and we will do everything that we need to do to make sure that they are adhered to. But at the same time, it's very important to me that we take advantage of the opportunity to build a relationship with a company that can create jobs here in Ontario and can tap into our educated workforce and we can become part of that innovation culture that Huawei is able to support. I guess there's been another question. There was another question about another company where we have an agreement. But I think in all of these situations, we have to find a way to make sure that our protections, our environmental, our privacy protections, that they're in place, the security of people in Ontario is in place, but at the same time, find a way to connect with innovation that is changing the face of the globe.
I'm Candy with Omni News. Just want to ask you a little bit about the manufacturing sector. Bank of Canada governor recently talked about the economic recovery, and he specifically mentioned that the export in Canada is still struggling, and we're struggling to hire people, and we're struggling to bring up to our pre-crisis level. How would you help the manufacturing sector, and what kind of initiative Ontario government is giving to this business owner in order for them to hire more people, with all these deals that you have with the Chinese counterparts? Right.
So in our economic plan, there are a couple of pillars that have directly to that speak directly to manufacturing. I think the most important one is our investment in talent and skills. So our educated workforce is a huge advantage for us. When we can say that over 60% of people in Ontario in the workforce have post-secondary education, that's a huge difference between us and other jurisdictions. And so we will continue to invest in our educated workforce. We will continue to try to improve the link between what manufacturers and business are looking for in terms of skills and talent, and what's happening in our education system, right from kindergarten all the way up. But there is no doubt in my mind that having the most educated workforce and having a highly skilled workforce has to be a top priority for us in Ontario. That is our strength. That is how we can punch above our weight. Having 13.5 million people, they all better be educated and capable, because there aren't very many of them when we compare with a place like China. But the other thing that is important, there are a couple of other things that are very important. Infrastructure is critical. We heard about infrastructure from a number of companies where they're a bit concerned about a lag in infrastructure building in Ontario or in Canada in general. But we were able to demonstrate by our commitment, $29 billion over the next 10 years, that we're going to make that investment a priority. That is something that's very important to manufacturers, because this is about moving goods around. If they can't move their goods around the Greater Toronto Hamilton area, then that's a real deterrent to investing in this region. So infrastructure is another hugely important piece. The third one that directly speaks to manufacturing and the kinds of companies that have perhaps struggled is partnerships. So understanding that it's very important that government make an investment and partner with companies when there's a need, for example, an investment in technology. If we're going to be in the advanced manufacturing business, part of that is about having the right technology in our plants that allow us to increase our productivity. So our Jobs and Prosperity Fund, which is $250 million, that is about those kinds of investments. If we go back to agri-food, $40 million a year, we're looking at investing in agri-food and agri-food processing. So that's very important. And the Jobs and Prosperity is $2.5 billion, isn't it? It's $2.5 billion, not $250 million. Sorry, I had the Youth Jobs Fund in my head. Yeah, $2.5 billion over 10 years, yeah.
This is Cindy for Fairchild TV again. My question is for Premier. The People's Bank of China announced to have a currency hub in Toronto, which is a few days ago. And it's the first currency hub in North America. And it could bring business or the Chinese business to Ontario invest in Ontario, and it's going to have an economic boost to the Ontario economics. But are you afraid that those investment could have a negative impact to the local Ontario business?
I'm very pleased that the R&B hub has been decided upon and that Ontario is going to be the host for that hub. In fact, we were concerned a few months ago that the whole issue had been stalled, and we in fact got in touch with the federal government and impressed upon the federal government how important this was. So we were pushing to have this happen because, you know, the fact is we want to be able to attract the kind of investment that we know will allow our economy to grow. You know, we went to China because we want those partnerships, and so anything that we can do to make it easier for Chinese companies to do business outside of China, I think we should be doing that. And again, I would just go back to what I said about putting the protections and making sure that we have the protections for Ontario businesses in place. But that goes without saying. That's the case no matter who we're dealing with. So I'm very, very pleased that the R&B hub will be here in Ontario, and I think it will do a couple of things. It will make it clear that Ontario and Toronto are very important. They're critical to the financial services in this country, and that is the fact. And so, having the R&B hub here emphasizes that for people outside of Ontario, and so it impresses upon businesses in China how important this centre is. And then, secondly, the real practical ease that it will allow for Chinese businesses.
I'm Joseph from CCTV. All we know that's a very successful delegation. Do you have any plan for next visit to China?
Well, I can't tell you that we have the next plan in the works yet, but I will tell you that my trip this time made it very clear to me that we need to continue to go back, that the relationship is important. You know, it's the reason that Dalton McGuinty went three times. And so this is our government's fourth trip, and it will not be our last.
I'm sorry, Premier. I think Dalton McGuinty went 4 times.
Did he go 4? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. He went with Tony Wong in 2005 or 6.
Oh, okay. So 4 times. Yes.
Hi,
So
Premier
it's
Wynne.
an ongoing process, ongoing relationship building.
Sorry. Hi, Premier Wynne. This is Forrest from Sinai, Toronto. Chinese investors are investing in Ontario's real estate market, and one of the largest is Greenland's project in Toronto. I know you visited the Greenland headquarters in Shanghai. Could you please tell us some details about your meeting with the president and what Ontario government can do to attract more Chinese investment in the real estate market in Ontario? Thank you.
So Greenland, we actually didn't get the chance to go to their headquarters. We had wanted to, but they came and met with us, and we had a very good meeting. You know, I'm very optimistic about the opportunities. Greenland is already building 2 towers in downtown Toronto, and a $400 million investment and 200 jobs that will be created as a result of that investment. And we talked about how they might make further investment and what would be necessary. I think the biggest impression that I got from that meeting was that they're interested in talking to particularly municipal leaders who have the authority over some of the urban planning issues and wanting to have access to those discussions. And we were right in the middle of the municipal election at that point, so I couldn't make any predictions about how that might turn out. But my hope is that they will connect with the municipal leaders, and if we can facilitate that, that was my commitment, that we would facilitate those discussions, because again, they are interested in making investments, but anything that they do, they need to work with the government, the local government, to make sure that what they want to do is consistent with the official plan and the vision of the city. But they were, they were very they were very excited about the investments in Ontario, and so I was very happy to have had the opportunity to meet with them. I wish I had seen their building because I think it's a very innovative space that they have created, and I'm looking forward to seeing the buildings that they build here.
Premier, Ray Chen from Singtel.
Hi, nice to see you.
And other than your next trip, but is that after this delegation, is that Ontario government is planning to have other ministers, just like agriculture, other ministers to go to China in the coming future?
Yes, so that is actually, and I'll have to defer to my Minister of International Trade, but I think that is very important. So it's one thing to plan the trips for the Premier to go, but there are specific ministers, and the Minister of Agriculture is top of mind, who I believe need to make the trip and need to build their own relationships with businesses and with people in China. So, you know, again, I can't commit to exactly when or which ministers would go, but what I can say is that part of our international trade strategy is about making those specific connections. And I think by my going, I've demonstrated my commitment to make that happen. And so that's some of the work that Michael Chan will be doing over the coming weeks and months.
Yes, I think, Premier, I think that's my job. Domestically stay
It is your job.
in Queen's Park and also outgoing as well. Well, China trip is not actually my first one. My first one, actually, I was in America. I paid a visit to Washington for 2 days before my trip to China. And looking at 2015, I already advised by my staff that, you know, they, my trade ministry already mentioned about they will be looking at 6 times some kind of trade mission to China by my ministry, and already inviting me to look at which one I would like to go. Definitely, as Premier mentioned, that, you know, one with the agriculture, I think is critically interesting to me. So it will be more trips to China as well as to other countries. I think China is not the only country in the world. I mean, America is important, and Europe, of course, is very important. South Asian, like India, is also
There's a history in this country of provincial and federal governments not always getting along and seeing the interests of their constituencies as somewhat different. We have, you know, we have worked very well on some files with the federal government, and I would say, for example, the auto sector. We've worked very closely with the federal government. We've made some very good investments in the auto sector with the federal government, and so we've had a lot of success there. On some other files, we haven't had so much success, and there continues to be some conflict, and quite frankly, a different philosophy about what is in the best interest of the people of the country. And then on other files, like the Canada Jobs Grant, for example, we have found a way to work together. I wish that there were more opportunity to work together. I think that when different levels of government are working together, there's much more success, which is why I make it my business to work closely with municipal governments. You know, it's very important to me that we work closely with our municipal partners. Our Minister of Municipal Affairs has a meeting every month with representatives from municipal governments. If we had that kind of relationship and that kind of contact with the federal government, I think we would have a very different success rate. So I'll continue to push for that. But having said that, I'm always going to stand up for the people of Ontario, you know, and I was elected by the people of Ontario, and I ran on a particular platform, and I am going to implement that platform. And if the federal government disagrees with me on certain things, we can have an exchange about it. But, for example, on the Ontario Retirement Pension Plan, the federal finance minister and the prime minister continue to argue that that's not something that's important. Well, quite frankly, the leadership from across the country at the provincial level and the territorial level has said it is a priority. It's important. People don't have enough security in their retirement. So we're taking action, and the fact that the federal government doesn't agree with me is not going to, it's not going to deter me, because you know, we're pretty confident that this is something that people need.
In terms of like trade
government and federal government are in the same way?
Well, I think it would be great if we could have had the federal government with us on this trade mission. The Council of the Federation organized it, and we would be happy. I would be happy as the Premier of Ontario to have a joint federal provincial trade mission. But I don't think there's any real conflict, not any deep conflict between our interests and the federal interests on the trade issues. And I think, we were just there. The Prime Minister was just there, and we were basically advancing many of the same issues. One last one?
Yeah.
They're good.
Okay, I'm good.
Have we got room here?